and CEO of. I worked at a district in Georgia that I supported 10 schools as the district behavior interventionist, while also serving as the district PBIS district coordinator and external coach. So when I came on board in 2022, I no longer work there. However, they had PBIS in place since 2019. As y'all know, 2020 came quickly in March. They got the training fall of 2019, and spring of 2020, they went virtual. So when I came on board in 2022, they were trying to hold on to PBIS really closely across 9 schools, but I was able to just get the ball rolling again. And part of that was getting our district leadership team going. And I'm just grateful to share my story and my experience with you all. Next slide for me. So the purpose of this particular section is just talking about effective DLT meetings. So we're going to identify key components that make DLT meetings productive and impactful. We're going to talk about action planning. I was able to, with the new district coordinator that came on board that supported me as my administrator support, I was very grateful for her. We created these action planning days for our schools so that they could learn their own strategies for creating actionable plans with clear ownership and accountability within their schools, and then the follow through. So it's great to have the meetings, it's great to action plan, but we definitely have to ensure that we are developing systems for after the meeting to ensure that implementation is still going and is actually creating meaningful change. So why do DLTs matter? They definitely drive the work forward. When you have everyone in the room together talking about the goals, talking about what is it that we are experiencing now and where do we want to be next year, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So it definitely gets the ball rolling and ignite strategic action. Again, getting the conversations going to get the work moving forward. And then it also ensures that accountability as well. When you have the right people in the room, you're able to look at that data, track that progress, but also think about what changes do we need to make and how can we ensure that we're maintaining our commitment to making meeting our goals. And then lastly, creating that alignment. So in the district that I worked in, we were very separate with our MTSS and PBIS work. So for example, I was the district coordinator working in student and support services. So I was supporting our general education population, and I was also supporting our special education population as well. But we had this special education department separate from student services. And then we also had teaching and learning departments where MTSS was housed. So although I was charged with not only supporting behavior intervention support across the different populations, I was also charged with supporting our school-wide tier 1 support efforts. So I definitely had my work cut out for me in supporting in this role, but it was helpful to get everyone in that room for our meetings to ensure that we were connecting our MTSS supports with PBIS implementation, because ultimately it's about the student success. So we just have to remember, yes, we are siloed. Yes, we're kind of doing our own things in our departments, but what is the ultimate goal, and ensuring that we were on the same page. Next slide for me. Thank you so much. So who needs to be in the room? So I'll be completely transparent. When I started in 2022, again, I'm a behavior analyst and I was hired as a behavior interventionist. So in my mind, I am, doing more of the tier 3 support for students who need tier 3 function-based plans, supporting with FBAs and BIPs. However, I also had the role of being the district coordinator for PBIS. Now, I was never a district coordinator before for PBIS. I lived and breathed tier 3 in that behavior support. So who needed to be in the room for these DLTs? The first year, I will say that I didn't do a good job with a DLT meeting because I didn't know that was something I needed to be doing, right? So we're definitely building the plane as it was flying. But once like I said, what's the importance of the DLT? When I started doing the work and getting the data together and training everyone, district-wide, school-wide, and PBIS, and just kind of resetting the space and just training them on what's expected in the PBIS world, I found that it's going to be important to have the right people in the same room talking the same things. So, who are those folks? So, district leaders, it would be ideal if you could have your superintendent as part of your DLT because they are the leader of the district. So, if they're bought in, if they're supportive of the work, then it will trickle down to everyone else who are district leaders and into the schools as well. Of course, you would want your MTSS representatives, any behavior coordinators, interventionists, just that behavior expertise, and of course, academics as well, because I have a colleague that says behavior eats academics for breakfast, right? So we can't just focus on behavior. We also have to ensure that we are looking at the academic data as well as we're making decisions around tier one school-wide PBIS support. Now, with the school leaders, it's great that we have our district leaders, but we also need to ensure that we have our principals. Isn't that great? We have our principals as well, because again, they are the leaders of the school. And what I have learned over the years of supporting this work is that if the leaders are not bought in, if they are not supportive of the work, no matter if you have great PBIS coaches and teachers and parents who love PBIS, it's not going to move forward, right? You have to have those decision makers in the room. So ideally, your DLT will include your administrators within the schools. Now, we did have PBIS administrators who weren't necessarily principals, so it could be an AP as well. But as long as there's some sort of administrator involved, it's going to be most helpful. Data specialists, you have to have the people who can look at the data, collect the data, or at least train people on what data to collect. So we had Swiss. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with that platform, but that was what we used to collect major and minor behavior infractions. And then also we used Infinite Campus for our major state reportable infractions. So that's where we would report some sort of disciplinary behavior incident where there needed to be some sort of disciplinary action. But our Swiss platform was more of an internal data collection system that allowed us to look at referral numbers day to day, week to week, month to month, and be able to actually compare what the behavior referrals were, what were the similar or thinking about behavior definitions. So unfortunately, we had, you know, defiance and disruptive as our behavior labels, so we had to ensure that we were very clear on what those behavior labels actually meant for our students as well. And then lastly, implementation leads. So that may be, in this case, I was kind of the implementation lead. I was ensuring that we had the meetings and I would summarize everything and just keep the work going as the district coordinator or external coach. And I would meet with the school-based PBIS coaches once a month to ensure that we were updating them on what the district kind of expected, and also give them the resources and support that they needed to actually implement it within the school setting. Next slide for me. So another nugget that I got from a mentor and supervisor is start with the end in mind. So what is the goal? And I found that, from the beginning of supporting this work, I've always had to ask in the meetings, whether it was a one-on-one meeting or some other type of meeting, because, we have all types of meetings, maybe not in a DLT, but, I've always asked, well, what is the goal? When we are making decisions about behavior, discipline referrals and disciplinary actions. What is our goal? So we have to think about, what are the district goals? You have your strategic plan. What outcomes do you have for behavior and when it comes to discipline and your academic growth? And what work are we doing to ensure that we are meeting those goals? Review those school level goals. So, we have our district level goals, but the schools themselves need their own individual goals. So we have to ensure that those priorities and or challenges that they are facing align with the district goals, but we're also keeping in mind that they have their own challenges as well. Align with state recognition. So we had our recognition levels of emerging, distinguished, and operational. So one of our district goals was to make sure that all of our schools reach that distinguished status. That's the highest of the highest recognition that we can get. We were all at emerging when I started in 2022. When I left, we had 6 out of the 9 schools at operational, which is one step below that distinguished. So we were definitely meeting that recognition goal. But I always said that it's not just about checking a box and seeing that on our, seeing the recognition. Are we actually meeting and living and breathing the behaviors and seeing that positive climate in our schools and across the district? That kind of shows that we deserve this recognition. And then lastly, defining the success matrix and metrics as well. So how is progress going to be measured? How is it going to be celebrated as well? Because as a behavior analyst, we love some positive reinforcement, right? But it has to make sense not only for the students, but also for the adults as well. I'm going to say, go to the next slide, but I'm going to read the note in the chat. Models empty but we use PBIS tools and it's quite similar in many respects. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. And just a note for that. So this is where the silo thing came in my district, is that MTSS, for us, our multi-tier systems of support, in teaching and learning, also addressed behaviors at that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 level, right? And me as the PBIS district coordinator, I'm supporting not yet at tiers 2 and 3. It's more that tier 1 school-wide. So before you even think about referring a student for that tier 2 level of support, how is that tier 1 foundation looking? And that's where I came in with trying to ensure that schools had their behavior expectations. They were teaching those expectations. They were talking about the behavior expectations, things such as, are we going to be safe, kind, and respectful? And if those are our 3 behavior expectations, PBIS expectations in the school, are we explicitly teaching what it means to be safe, what it means to be kind, so on and so forth? So that kind of leads into this slide where we do have data systems in place and surveys that we gave to the schools, the PBIS teams within the schools, and then also our walkthrough data that we did as an external observer at the district level. So the perception data gauged the staff perceptions of the implementation. So are they ready for PBIS? Are they ready to support children to be successful by acknowledging these expectations that we set forth in our culture, in our community? What level of buy-in do we have for staff? Is that kind of low, medium, or high priorities? So you say, this is not being implemented in our school, and it's a high priority that it is implemented as far as collecting the data or having a system to teach our students how to behave in our school. That's where we would utilize that information to see if we can get the staff bought in. And if we see that this is a high priority, the school-based team will have to prioritize that as well. And then you'll get more buy-in from the staff if they see that you are implementing what they prioritize. The fidelity data box, that's where we talk about how does the team kind of measured their implementation of the PBIS expectations, right? So, especially with that tier one piece, that's where we started. And as we get that kind of going with fidelity, then that's when we would start implementing the classroom wide PBIS and then tier two, tier three. So, this is why it got very confusing for us because, we have MTSS, but then we also have PBIS, which lives in a whole different department, but we're talking about the same things. So Georgia is working on doing an integration of both the MTSS and PBIS and are calling it the GAMTSS because we were talking the same language, but just very siloed in our work. But when the team, school-based team, actually was able to assess their implementation quality, then they were able to see those gaps. How I supported schools was, a survey is a survey, right? The perception data and the fidelity data, they checked the box, they did the surveys, but are you actually looking at your data? Are you analyzing it and are you making decisions from it? So that was my role as the district coordinator to help them really look at and analyze the data that they were collecting. Now, lastly, on this slide, the walkthrough data, that's when we came in with a walkthrough tool, and there were questions that we would ask the staff and the students around PBIS. So say the behavior expectations is safe, kind, and respectful. We would ask, hey, what are the behavior expectations for your school? And sometimes it's the little kindergartners that we would interview, and they were so cute, and they would be able to tell us safe, kind, and respectful. And then one of the other expectations is that they get acknowledged for that. So it could be a school buck or points or whatnot. And so we would ask them, when's the last time, or did you receive a school buck recently? And if they said, no, I never received one, then that's data, right? To say, hey, we need to ensure that we are giving acknowledgments frequently so that students who have not received those acknowledgments and they're actually meeting those expectations, that they are getting acknowledged for that. So we had that data point as well. Next slide. I hope I'm doing okay with time. Okay, and then this last little piece here is when you think about the format for your meeting, when you have everybody in the room, I tried to be intentional of having one-on-one meetings, especially when it came to one-on-one meetings with each school, whether it was with their PBIS coach, principal, and their AP, who may have been the PBIS administrator. I would make sure that I dug a little bit deeper into their data one-on-one. So it's not to call anybody out. Nobody wants to be called out with their data, right? So when we would meet at the DLT, we would make sure we celebrate wins. If it was like an individual school or whatnot, we would focus on celebrating the wins. But then overall, we would combine the information across the 9 schools to ensure that we are celebrating the win across the district. So it's more district wins. Again, not to call anybody out. And if there were some areas of improvement, whether it's number of referrals or it's just, just very high referral numbers. I didn't say, but we only had one middle school and one high school. So we wouldn't even separate those two. We would just say primary and secondary, again, just to not call each school out. But again, we would meet with them individually to ensure that they looked at their individual school data. So purpose of the meeting format for DLT is here's our district level data. Let's work together to see, again, what is our goal for the district, right? And that's what the point of the DLT is, the district level goals, and how is this data showing that we are meeting those goals? And if we're not, how can we collaborate to ensure that we are solving whatever issue or challenge that we're having and putting some structured protocols and processes in place so that they can train their school staff in implementing some of those practices. And then, of course, with every meeting, you want to make sure that there's assigned action items and deadlines, because if you don't assign it, it's not going to happen. All right, I think I'm almost done. This might be the last slide. You can go ahead, Kathy. So now what? Post DLT, you've had your meeting, and our meetings, we usually had two. meetings per year. So one kind of setting the tone for the year, what's expected. And I would say that we landed on more like a November, December team DLT meeting to kind of look at the fall data, kind of see where we are and what the action steps need to be for the spring. And then we would have one towards the end of the spring to say, okay, this is the data for both fall and spring, and what can we do to plan for the next school year. The half-day planning sessions was specifically for each school who wanted to do it. So we offered 4-hour half-day action planning sessions with the PBIS district coordinator to really look at their data, their behavior data, kind of looking at those assessment tools that I mentioned with the team assessment, the staff assessment, and the walkthroughs, and supported them in creating their school improvement plan or action plan that they needed. But that was district level support. Also ensuring that they had access to their data, teaching them how to analyze that information and actually go through the problem solving process. Also prioritizing 2 to 3 next steps. What do you want this to look like next year? Remember, the district goal is this. This is where we are in that district goal. How can your school help us meet that district goal? And essentially just building ownership within the schools. It's great when you have the district support, but we are here to support, right? We're not here to do the work for you. So we want to make sure that you know that you own this work and that you have the support of the district in order to move the needle forward. All right, I think that's the last slide I have, Kathy. Oh, follow-up and key takeaways, just really quickly, because I know my time is almost up. You want to make sure you track progress, right? With data, data, data. You have tools, ensuring that those tools are actually measuring the data that you want to see, so that when it comes to another DLT meeting, you can aggregate that information and make sure that you are sharing it out. You can have check-ins in between times. So again, we only had 2 DLT meetings, but in between time, we were meeting with the PBIS coaches and PBIS administrators to ensure that they were on the right track. We were always coaching and supporting the school-based team. And then when you did have the DLT, we just ensured that we highlighted the goals again and ensured that we were going towards the right direction. And that is it for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What questions do we have for Jareen?